Number 1. My second year of college was a difficult year. I wish I could say that it was due to organic chemistry or boyfriend drama, or anything other than what actually happened. I started out my year in a great dorm. I loved my hallmates, my room, and the fact that a dining hall was less than 100 feet away. Obviously, I spent a lot of time there, and I got to know the staff. I had worked in a restaurant for 2 years before going to school, and I could identify with the struggles that came with being a food service worker, especially because I was at a notoriously snobby school, so I could sympathize with the staff having to deal with rich kids and their entitled bullshit. Most of the staff were lovely people, but one in particular seemed to take a real interest in me. He was a young white man, not much older than myself, named Matt. He always went out of his way to talk to me and ask me questions about myself and how school was going. One evening, I was doing homework in the dining hall around closing hours. Matt sat with me, and we chatted for a bit. He said he was off work and heading to his car to smoke a bowl before he went home, and asked me if I wanted to join. I had only smoked a few times before, but I enjoyed it, and he seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. I was still very much a sheltered child, and to me, he didn't seem like a bad guy, so he couldn't be, right? We lit up in his car in the parking lot behind the dining hall, and I got a glimpse of the real Matt. He ranted about how his ex-girlfriend had recently dumped him. He called her a bitch and a whore, and told me unnecessary details about their apparently kinky sex life. The virgin in me was incredibly uncomfortable, only made worse by the paranoia brought on by the weed. He also went on about how he hated the students at my university, especially the girls, saying they treated him as less than human. I was completely speechless, and when I didn't respond, he tried to apologize for going off, saying that I was different and that he wanted to get to know me better. I remember blurting out that I needed to go, and I got the hell out of Dodge. He got out too, and shouted after me to come back, and I thought he might chase me. But he didn't, and I got back to my room safely. I avoided that dining hall like the plague for the next week, and I didn't see him again. Until the one night that still haunts me to this day. Around midnight, I was walking back to my dorm alone from a function at the Christian Center, which was only about 2 blocks away. I know walking by myself was stupid, but the buses weren't running, and I felt bad about asking someone to walk with me, because there were some steep inclines between the center and my dorm. I was walking along an empty residential street that was just around the corner from my dorm, when I noticed a black SUV that was creeping along behind me. It was going so slow that it was hard not to notice. At first, I tried not to panic, but it quickly clicked that it was the same car as Matt's. I started to run when it sped up ahead of me, and a man in a ski mask jumped out. I just knew that it was Matt. From here, things happened very fast. I tried to run the other way, but he grabbed me from behind and was struggling to get my wrists into handcuffs while simultaneously pulling me towards his car. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting like hell. We fought each other for a few minutes like that before he dropped the handcuffs and I was able to slam my heel into his foot. I think those two things and my relentless struggling shook his confidence, because he ran back to his car and sped off. Freaked out, I ran back to my room, constantly looking back behind me to see if he was after me. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I was able to call the police. I was very lucky that night, not only because I got away, but also because he was caught shortly after I called 911. He was arrested, and when the police searched his car, they found handcuffs, duct tape, and a knife. During interrogation, he confessed that he was bitter and depressed over his breakup, and he wanted to make someone, feel pain like he feels it. Nearly a year later, after a painful testimony from me, he was convicted to 40 years in prison with a 32-year suspension for abduction and intent to defile. Number 2. I have included photos where appropriate, because otherwise the descriptions of everything go on and on. When I was 11, my family of 6 decided to make the move from suburbia to a lovely rural bungalow. I have 3 sisters, aged 9, 12 and 18 at the time. We were all excited for the privacy and isolation of our new home. For once in our lives, we would have no neighbours and a large yard to play in. Our home had large picture windows, giving us a beautiful view of the farmland around us. My parents disliked curtains, because there were no neighbours and they collect dust, so we all figured, what's the point? The summer there was so much fun. Every morning I would get up and take my dog for a walk around the woods in our backyard. I absolutely adored the feeling of being alone and was enjoying the freedom of all of our new space. Fall eventually rolled around, and I continued my routine of walking my dog both in the morning and after school. I remember one morning, while walking my dog, I began feeling uncomfortable. I was alone in the woods. There was no one else around, but I still felt as though I was being watched. I had shivers down my back the entire walk, and for an 11-year-old, I just felt really strange. My dog was acting weird too. I kept trying to go further into the woods, but she kept trying to pull me towards our shed. The shed rested at the very back of our yard, on the edge of the woods where the trees thin out quite a bit. I didn't like how I was feeling, so I picked up my dog and brought her back to the house and went on with my day. Days went by, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, especially when I was in my bedroom with a huge window in it that overlooked our backyard. The view of the woods that I had previously loved was beginning to scare me. I assumed it was just because it was fall, and the forest started looking kind of gloomy. I started having nightmares about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the figure of a man in our backyard. Weird things kept happening around our house. We all suddenly noticed that we were eating things like bread a lot quicker. Every morning, half a loaf of bread would be gone, and my parents attributed this to their hungry, growing children. One evening I woke up, and I heard noises coming from our family kitchen, which was just down the hall from my bedroom. It sounded like someone had come home, and I assumed it was my oldest sister. The only thing that was strange was that her footsteps sounded a lot heavier than usual. The noise stopped very quickly, and I was able to fall back asleep. In the morning, my mum asked me and my 2 sisters, the 9 and 12-year-old ones, if we woke up last night to make food. We all said no, and then asked if it was our oldest sister. My mum told me that she stayed at her friend's house last night, and then thought it was probably the dog making noise. I was terrified. I knew I heard unfamiliar footsteps. That night, I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I still felt like someone was watching me. Eventually, I fell asleep, but I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. I heard noises in the house again. It was the same footsteps I had heard before. I stayed in my bed, and I felt paralyzed. I rolled over and I faced the window, hoping that if someone came into my room, they would think I was asleep. The noises stopped, and I closed my eyes as hard as I could. I told myself that I was just imagining things, and that monsters aren't real. About an hour must have gone by, and I eventually opened my eyes. When I looked out of the window, I swear to God I could see a man standing in our backyard, watching our house. This photo contains a cheesy edit of where I saw him. I was terrified enough that I didn't move at all, and eventually fell asleep again. I was so relieved to wake up alive that morning, but was still terrified of our backyard. I ran into the kitchen to tell my mum what I saw, and I refused to walk the dog. I'm not quite sure if she really believed me at the time, or thought I was having night terror hallucinations, which I did have quite often when I was younger. I went to school that morning. I was anxious all day. The last thing I wanted to do was go home. When I did get home, I saw police vehicles surrounding the house. They had the dogs with them, and they were searching our yard. They told us a man who had broken into another house and beaten the couple living there was suspected of being on our property. He stole their wallets, photos, and other small items of value. The biggest thing he stole was their car, which had been ditched about 10 kilometers from our home. While searching our property, they found all of the items from the previous break-in hidden around our yard. While searching our property, they found all of the items from his previous break-in hidden around our yard. They also discovered that he had been hiding in our shed since his previous break-in. They said he had done this at the previous home prior to breaking in. He would spend time watching the house and observing the residents' routine until he knew it well enough to start coming inside the house. They said he had a long history of premeditated violence, including child abuse, and believed he was planning on eventually harming us. In the shed, they found wrappers, empty cans of food, and scraps. They told us he was definitely coming into our house for food during the night. From the shed, he had a perfect view of our home and could see when we all went to bed. Although they searched our house and property with the dogs, they didn't find him. After that day, I realized that if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Number 3. I was just 18 then, attending my friend Laura's wild birthday party at her house, where the booze flowed freely. I had a policy of only drinking what I personally pour out of a bottle or from an unopened can. I was normally very careful. Towards the middle of the party, I was introduced to Eric, a friend of a friend. After a few jokes, he said I could really use some coffee. Then he proceeded to reach into his bag and pulled out a sachet of instant coffee and a jar of Nutella. I was intrigued. He went into the kitchen and came back with a steaming mug. I swear to God, the smell of Nutella coffee was heavenly. So heavenly that I forgot to be careful. He watched me for a moment, and then insisted that I take it. I didn't take much convincing. I thanked him, and I drank the coffee happily. 20 minutes later, I started feeling really sleepy. It was odd, since caffeine tends to get me super hyper and gives me insomnia. I shouldn't have been sleepy. Eric was still chatting with me, but I was finding it harder and harder to focus. I made a move for the bathroom, and he stood up to help me. I stumbled into Laura as we made our way out of the living room. Just at that moment, I had this gut instinct that I needed to throw myself on Laura. I was barely coherent at this point, but I focused all of my attention on wrapping my arms around my friend. I can't even remember what happened for the rest of the night. In the morning, I found myself sleeping on Laura's bed, while she was sleeping next to me. Apparently, I had clung onto her so tightly, and Eric sought to untangle me. She sensed that something was up, and decided not to let him take me away. After a while, Eric left the party. Several people then told her that he had a history of preying on girls, and that they were glad that he was gone. Laura basically spent the rest of the party sitting on the couch, with me hugging her and snoring away, and then she dragged me up to bed. I'm really lucky to have a friend like her. And girls, never, ever drink anything at a party that you didn't pour yourself, even delicious Nutella coffee. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed these stories from Reddit users, and if you'd like to hear more, then you can go over to Top 15's channel, where a few other horror narrators and I have collaborated, and we've made a 2-hour-long video. I think it's around 2 hours at least, but yeah, you can check that out by going to the link in the description below, follow it, and you'll find your way to that video. And I had a real blast making it, so make sure to check it out if you feel so inclined. Anywho, make sure to subscribe and join the Lazy Legion if you haven't already, and you will hear from me again very, very soon. Stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.